What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of F1 Fantasy. Pole position is Monday, March 17th. My name is Ewan. On today's episode, we're going to go over the ultimate chip strategy guide for the 2025 season. Coming out a little bit earlier this year because, the first sprint race is China this weekend. So we kind of got to figure some stuff out. It was a great first week of F1 Fantasy. In the content department, if you want to look at my review episode, I did a live stream about an hour after the Australian Grand Prix episode, and I got it all out of my system. It was quite cathartic because your boy didn't do too hot in week one, but hopefully you guys are sticking around. Like I said, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we will get through this together. And you're looking at me right now, and you're like, why is he wearing a Haas shirt? Haas looked awful yesterday. Well, it's symbolic. It's symbolic because, like Haas, I was wondering about what was going on in preseason testing for my squad, just getting operationally sound, looking at what's good, what's bad. And then we got out on track on Sunday, and it was a disaster. And things didn't go that well. So this is symbolic because Haas can fight back like I am going to fight back in the F1 Fantasy 2025 season. Hopefully you join me for the ride. So even if you did well, if you did bad, if you did downright negative scores, stick around. We're going to get through this together, everyone, and kind of move on throughout the 2025 season. 23 races to go, so don't worry too much. But what are we talking about today? We're talking about chip strategy. So going to go over three things today. What are chips? When should we play chips? And two different types of chip strategy, guys, depending on how you did in Australia, because we got to think a little bit about how we did. But yes, as you can see in all its glory, right up there, 52 points, 901,000 in the world right now with a budget of 98.2 million. So I lost 1.8 million in my squad. It did not go swimmingly well for me in week one, but that's okay. We got time to recover, and so do you. So what are chips? Why should we play chips? And chip strategy guide. Let's get into it here. So what are chips? There are 6 chips in the F1 fantasy game. They're, I guess, what you would call power boosts in F1 fantasy. They kind of give you a chance to score more points, save some points here. You get 6 chips. You can use each one of them once a season, and you can never play 2 on the same race weekend. So you got Extra DRS, Limitless, No Negative, Final Fix, Wildcard, and Autopilot. But what are each of those chips? Well, Extra DRS is when you select one driver to score triple the points in one race weekend. And it's also extra powerful because you get the regular DRS boost that you have every single week, and you apply that to another driver. I'm going to get into when we play each of these chips in just a little bit here. Moving on to the next chip here. Extra DRS and Limitless are probably the 2 most powerful chips in the game. Limitless, maybe a little bit more powerful, but Extra DRS boost, we'll get into it. So Limitless is an unlimited budget. If anyone has ever played Champions League Fantasy, they will know what the Limitless budget is. You get an unlimited budget. You get to select the same type of squad, 5 drivers, 2 constructors for one race weekend. However, the team that you set the week before that will be the team that grows budget. So if you select Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and Charles Leclerc, Ferrari, and McLaren this weekend in China, those assets will not be what grows your budget. It will be the Australian team that grows your budget. And that's going to be pretty key when we get into the chip strategy guide. So if you want to jump ahead, timestamps in the description below. As always, go check that out. Next up here, we've got Autopilot. This is pretty much DRS boost on Autopilot. It's the auto pick. It goes through your squad, and you pick the highest scoring driver from that weekend, and the game applies the DRS boost to that driver. So like I said, I'm going to get into when we should play each of these chips, but like an example is last year in Abu Dhabi, I had Oscar Piastri and Charles Leclerc. I had the Autopilot chip remaining for the final game. I didn't really know who to play it on, final race, sorry. And I activated the Autopilot chip, and luckily it selected Charles Leclerc. That did very well. That's where I finished top 1,000 in the world because of that chip. So that is quite handy there. Next 3 chips here are No Negative, Final Fix, and Wildcard. No negative is the chip we should have played in Australia yesterday, everybody, because it would have saved us all a boatload of points, especially me, as you can see, 52 points. After qualifying, I was on 64 points and ended the weekend on 52. So that's how well it went for me. But essentially, any negative points scored in a session for any asset will be reset to 0 for the weekend. So like Ollie Behrman on Saturday scored -5 in qualifying because he didn't set a time. That would have been 0. Isaac Hadjar, Fernando Alonso, Carlos Sainz, they all scored -20 or -19 yesterday because of their DNFs. That would have been 0. You would have saved all those points. So that's what the no negative chip does. It kind of like bounces you back to 0. Final fix is when you replace one driver after a competitive session with another within the cost cap. So say you have George Russell, and he does quite well in qualifying. Say he qualifies like P4, but Oscar Piastri qualifies like 17th for some reason. And you have enough budget you can activate the final fix. And if you had enough budget, you could bring in Oscar Piastri to replace George Russell for the rest of the weekend. So on a sprint weekend, you can replace them after the sprint race, and you'll get the points for the replacement driver for qualifying and for the Grand Prix. However, if you just do it on a normal weekend, you'll activate the chip after final fix, or you activate the final fix chip after qualifying, and you'll get that replacement driver for the Grand Prix. Important thing to note is this is just a elastic transfer, because once that session is over, you will snap back to the original driver that you replaced for that weekend in your F1 fantasy team. Wildcard, if you played any fantasy soccer game, you'll know that this is just unlimited transfers for one race week. You can reset the team if you've made a mistake, or like if a constructor has brought upgrades, you can kind of get all of those assets into your team. Very important chip. Not always the most widely touted chip, but in 2025, it could be kind of important because we do have a couple of big moments coming up in the season where it could shake up the grid and kind of let us know what is coming for the remainder of the season. So those are the 6 chips, but when do we want to play those chips? Well, like I said, there are 6 chips and there are 6 sprint weekends in 2025. We've got China this weekend, Miami, Belgium, Austin, Brazil, and Qatar. Austin, Brazil, Qatar, they are towards the end of the season. I think that's race 19, 21, and 23. China is the second race. Miami is the 6th race of the season. And Belgium is maybe the 13th or 14th race of the season. And why do we want to play chips in a sprint weekend? Because there are more points on offer. So on a sprint weekend, there are 3 scoring sessions. There's the sprint race, the qualifying session, and the Grand Prix. Whereas in a regular weekend, we've only got the qualifying session and the Grand Prix. There are no points in F1 Fantasy for the sprint qualifying session. So on Friday in China, we will actually get to see the grid before the deadline lock for the sprint race. So in a sprint race weekend, the schedule is there's one practice, then they do a sprint qualifying session, then the sprint, then the Grand Prix qualifying, and then the Grand Prix on Sunday. So that's where we're at there. So Limitless, Extra DRS, no negative can be especially powerful during sprints. However, no negative was quite powerful yesterday in Australia. So going through kind of the ideal times to play each chip. Extra DRS Boost, probably want to save that for later in the season when teams can afford at least 2 premium drivers, because then you can have your 3x on like a Lando Norris and your 2x on an Oscar Piastri. That would probably be the ideal setup for 2025 based on what we know so far. Like McLaren looked very strong in testing. Even in the wet yesterday, they looked super strong. One little snafu for Oscar Piastri, but 3x, 2x on Lando and Oscar is ideal. However, you want to wait for later in the season because then you also want to have like strong constructors and stuff like that as well. So we'll kind of probably update this at the second half of the season, but for right now, you kind of want to save your Extra DRS boost for the second half of the season. Limitless, earlier in the season is usually better when prices are still low and no one else in the field can get to those prices. However, Limitless, I think, is probably not an option for you if you have lost budget in China, and I will get into that in a little bit. But like I said, if you can't stick around for the whole episode, jump to the timestamps in the description below, go to Chip Strategy Guide. But yeah, Limitless, when you use it later in the season, teams may have had enough time to grow their budget where they could maybe have like 3 or 4 of your 7 assets in your squad. I'm not sure how that's going to shake out with the 2025 pricing budgets and stuff like that. That could be a little bit different, where you could maybe save it for Miami or even maybe for Belgium like halfway through this year. But usually a Limitless chip is a lot stronger earlier in the season. Autopilot is really when the sims, the practice data, maybe even your gut cannot identify a clear favorite for a race weekend. More likely later in the year when you can afford that 2 premium driver setup. Like my T2 team this week, I had Aston Martin and Haas as my constructors, but I had Piastri, Leclerc, and Russell as my 3 drivers along with 2 B-tier drivers. Could have been a pretty good time to use the autopilot. I had the 2x on Piastri, but if I used it on Russell, I would have scored like, 24? So 48 points compared to the 16 I scored with Piastri. So it kind of shows how powerful that chip can be. So if you get to that point in the season where you're running 2 premium drivers, maybe like 2.5 premium drivers, someone looks super strong on a certain race weekend, that is when I would use the autopilot chip. No negative. Australia, that is when we should have used it. We were not talking about it. I kind of failed as a F1 fantasy content creator, analyst, not touting the no negative enough. 6 rookies, rain. I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Captain Hindsight, thank you very much. But yeah, you want to use a no negative when the weather looks wet and treacherous, and sprint weekends could possibly save you more points. However, like people that used it in Brazil last year had a great opportunity to use it, and it was probably worked out quite well for them. But also, yeah, Australia, that was my bad, guys. I should have been touting the no negative a little bit more. I did kind of talk about it a little bit on X last week, where you can follow me at F1 Fantasy Ewan, as long as you can also follow me on TikTok there as well. But yeah, just when the weather looks bad, no negative, especially with 6 rookies in the field this season, 5 rookies, whatever you want to call them. Liam Lawson is a rookie, isn't a rookie, I'm not so sure. Final fix when we want to play that chip is when a top of the grid driver has a poor qualifying at a strong overtake track. So the best example of this would be like if Lando Norris qualified in like 17th in Zandvoort, which is a pretty good overtaking track, has a lot of, maybe not a lot of overtaking opportunities, but the turn 1 kind of hairpin is a very strong overtaking place in the F1 calendar. We've used this before with like Max Verstappen has sometimes qualified in, or started the race in like 17th in Belgium when the Red Bull was a rocket ship. So maybe there'll be instances this season, but that's kind of like a situational. We need to wait and see. But if you like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel or the podcast if you're listening on the audio side. I will alert you to when there is a great situation for that to happen. And the wild card is kind of when you want to shake up the grid, or whenever there's an upgrade that shakes up the grid. You'll probably need to make at least 4 transfers for the wild card to be worth it. And then potentially it could be this week in China is when you want to activate your wild card. We will get into that there. But when I say 4+ transfers for a wild card, because if you have 2 free transfers, you get 2 free transfers every week. Sometimes you can roll them. You can only use one of the transfers and that third one will roll. So the following race weekend, you'll have 3, but that is the max that you can have in F1 Fantasy. You can't go like 4, 5, 6, that sort of thing. So 3 is the most. So if you want to make 3 transfers this week, you would be taking a negative 10 points because you lose 10 points for every extra transfer. If on a certain race weekend you had 3 transfers and you wanted to make 4 transfers, that would also be a negative 10. However, if you had 2 free transfers and wanted to make 4 free transfers, or 4 transfers in total, that would be a negative 20, and that would be wildcard range. That is why China might be a good opportunity for those of us that did not so hot in China to use the wildcard. But I will get into that in just a little bit. Thanks for sticking around, guys. Really appreciate it. I know some people did really poorly in F1 Fantasy this week. I am one of them. So please stick around. I promise that we will get back. We're going to have the recovery drive of all recovery drives in 2025. They will speak about our F1 Fantasy seasons at the Thanksgiving table lore this season, or Christmas table lore. People will be like, your grandma will be like, how did your F1 Fantasy season go? And you'll be like, well, Australia, 44, 52 points. It looked like I was down in the dumps. But no, I fought back and we climbed up the grid and we finished with a top 1,000 season. That is the goal, people. So right now, 901,000 in the world. I'm going to chop off 900,000 spots off of that rank. And we are going to be top 1K by the end of the year. So that's the goal. We'll see how optimistic I am. My wife is always telling me I'm far too optimistic, but let's bring that energy to the F1 Fantasy Pole Position YouTube channel. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we will do this together. All right, let's get into this now. Chip strategy guide. If you are rich, and let me qualify what rich means. It means you're not where I'm at, where you've lost 1.8 million. So Australia went very well for you. You've gained budget. You have rising drivers in your squad. And I will talk more about rising assets and pricing budgets in my Chinese Grand Prix team selection video, which will be out on Wednesday. So like I said, stick around for that. You're playing from a position of strength. If you activate the Limitless now, the rest of the game, most of us are scrambling around trying to figure out how we're going to get on these rising budget assets. You can use your Limitless right now and play from a position of strength, and you can save your wild card for later in the season. So on the right-hand side here, I've got the chip and ideally the time where you would play them in the race. So the Limitless chip right now, if you are rich, you could play it in China, easy peasy. The only thing about China is you've got about 4 of the 7 assets locked in. We're going to have 1 free practice and a sprint qualifying session. So that will hopefully leave the picture a little less murky. So we're going to have Lando, Oscar, Max, and McLaren. That's going to be 4 of your 7 assets if you're on a Limitless. And I'll do a whole Limitless draft on the Chinese Grand Prix team selection episode. Wildcard you could save for Spain or Canada, and that is because in Spain, the FIA and F1 are introducing this new technical directive where, layman's terms, the wing is getting less flexible and it might shake up the grid. So for the first 8 races of the season, they have a wing that's a little bit more flexible than it's going to be for the remainder of the season. And this could potentially shake up the grid. This is also when teams traditionally bring upgrades like Imola, Spain kind of area, because Barcelona was previously the F1 preseason testing track. So teams kind of like to go there, test out their upgrades, all that fun stuff. Or you could also use your wildcard in Canada. You can wait for Spain, see the data, and then the race after in Canada, you'll be like, Ferrari looks super strong now. Red Bull looks super strong now. I can transfer all of these assets out and bring back in all of the teams that look way better with this new technical directive. Autopilot could also be used in Spain or Canada. Say that you've had enough money, you have enough money to get to 2 premium drivers by the time we get to the 8th race. That might be a little bit tricky. You could switch around some of your constructors, that stuff. You could activate the autopilot. Say you have Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri in your lineup. And you're like, I don't really know who's going to do better between Ferrari and McLaren this weekend. Hit that autopilot and let the game do the hard work for you. Or you could also use it in Canada. So wildcard and autopilot could be kind of linked this season in the Spain and Canada races. Extra DRS boost, you're going to want to save that for later in the season when you can run one of your strongest teams. You've built up budget over the first 18, 19, 20 races, and you can use it in Qatar or Austin, really. Those are going to be typically your drier tracks, especially compared to Brazil, which is the other sprint race. So that's where the extra DRS boost would come in. You've built up your budget for a long time. You have enough dry track representative. We have some dry running. You'll have a free practice and a sprint qualifying to kind of figure out who's looking good that weekend, and then you'll be good to go. No negative, like I said. Probably should have played in Australia, but Monaco can always cause a little bit of chaos, and Brazil was the runaway leader for no negative last season with the kind of wet and wild conditions at the Brazilian Grand Prix, sprint qualifying in general. Alexander Albon didn't even start the Grand Prix, so you would have saved yourself a negative 25 points for his did not start there. And then final fix, that's just very situational, race by race basis. And like I said, stick around to F1 Fantasy YouTube channel and there will be a video or an alert or a TikTok or something that comes out to be like, use your final fix this weekend, it's going to be huge. So that is where we are at. That's a chip strategy guide if you are quote unquote rich. But let's get into a little bit of my situation. If Australia went poorly for you, you've lost budget, you're rostering sinking assets, you're going to have to be proactive in your lineup changes. And there's not too much that is different here for like the chip strategy long term. However, Wildcard is probably your option this weekend in China. It doesn't have to be. On X yesterday, I was pretty strongly in favor of the Wildcard. However, talking to people, had a great discussion on there. So like, seriously, follow me on X. I will just talk F1 Fantasy all day long because that's what I was doing yesterday. I was playing Mario Party with my wife, having a beer, and yeah, I was also just like kind of like chit-chat about F1 Fantasy all day. It was fantastic. So, but yeah, right now I am leaning towards China or a negative 10 for my free transfers to get off of sinking assets. And we're going to talk about that. I'm about to go into my team and I'm going to show you what this is about. But then Limitless, you would have to save for Miami or Belgium, Spa right there. So that'd be the 6th race or the 14th race. Autopilot, again, you could use in Spain and Canada, but you won't have the opportunity to kind of make a huge change if something comes along with that technical directive and really shakes up the grid. And then the second half of the season, or the last 3 trips, are also kind of the same as this chip strategy guide for the rich section, where you can do Qatar and Austin for your extra DRS boost, the no negative in Monaco or Brazil, and the final fix will be situational. But for us people that have lost budget or are not entirely loving our teams heading in to the Chinese Grand Prix and the sprint weekend and the qualifying session and stuff, let's check out a mini team selection here for F1 Fantasy. All right, everyone. So here is the T1 team that, did not do too hot. As you can see here, we've got Oscar that lost 0.3, Carlos lost 0.6, Bortoleto 0.6, Hadjar 0.6, Ocon went up 0.2, McLaren went up 0.3, and Williams went down 0.2. So the prevailing theory right now in F1 Fantasy is that because of the way that the pricing is structured, most of the assets that are going down are going to continue going down because in order to go back up, they're going to have to score a lot of points, especially the B tier drivers. Oscar Piastri has a chance to go back up next weekend, so I'm not too worried about him, but Sainz, Bortoleto, Hadjar, for me, they are likely to go down in value again. And like I said, I'm going to get into like the nitty gritty of that in the Chinese Grand Prix team selection episode that comes out on Wednesday. So stick around for that. So right now if I get rid of Sainz and I get rid of Hadjar and I get rid of Bortoleto, that leaves me 24.8 million in the bank. And as you can see here, there's not a lot of risers. I've got to sort by value. We got Lance Stroll, we got Esteban Ocon, we got Nico Hülkenberg. But in general, it's not looking too pretty over here for the kind of F1 fantasy pole position, which is not great, right? Not super good. So, let's build this. So 17.8 left if I do Sainz all the way down to Hülkenberg. And then I could also bring in, let me see here. Sorry, the team is on another screen, so it doesn't look all that good. I'd have Lance Stroll, and then I'd have 9.1 left to kind of mess around with, which could get me Yuki Tsunoda. or that's kind of like a weird price point. So I'd have to figure out what the last B tier driver is. So that's like 2 transfers there. So I could bring back in Hadjar. Maybe I wouldn't have to use, I could use my 2 free transfers and get off of 3 of the sinking assets and keep 1 of them in. And that could also depend on who looks good in practice, who looks good in the sprint, that kind of stuff. The one thing I wouldn't do, and I should have said this at the top, don't activate these chips yet. Don't hit the wildcard, don't hit the Limitless. Wait till Friday. I'm going to be doing another deadline stream on Saturday morning at 2 a.m. UK time, 10 p.m. Eastern on the US, and we can hit all of our chips then. Maybe you can't, if you can't stay up that late, maybe there'll be like a Friday night episode that I'll do. We could maybe do 2 little deadline streams. Maybe like 30 minutes on Friday and an hour on Saturday morning. Let me know in the comments below if that would be better for y'all, or I'll maybe put like a poll up on X. So yeah, so this would be like where I go with 2 free transfers potentially, and like it would kind of help the damage a little bit, like it would soften the blow a little bit, because Stroll and Hülkenberg are projected to continue to rise just because of how well they did in Australia. However, there is another option where I get rid of Oscar Piastri and I bring in Kimi Antonelli, which is not bad, and then I could also bring in Stroll. I could keep Esteban, bring in Hülkenberg. That leaves me 12.8. So I could also keep Sainz. So that's a negative. So that's a negative 10 right there. Antonelli is pretty assuredly going to rise. That's going to be 0.6. This team would potentially suffer in the points department for a sprint, but it would probably get me back on track in the budget department. I think Antonelli, Stroll, and Hülkenberg are all set to rise again. Sainz is a little bit more difficult. Ocon, we'll see how it goes. It could be better because it's a sprint weekend, that kind of thing. He could save some stuff there. And then I think Williams will, if they do what they did in Australia minus Carlos Sainz kind of slip under the safety car there, I think Williams will rise back up as well. So this is where I could go with a negative 10. Let me know in the comments below what your kind of lineup dilemmas are like. We can talk through them. We'll get some stuff going. If you want me to specifically address your lineup, hit a comment below, subscribe and like, and then I will talk about it on Wednesday's show for the Chinese Grand Prix team selection. We'll go over some like specific scenarios, and like I'll pick out like 3 or 4 and we'll go over those on the episode altogether. So this is kind of where I'm at right now. I can get away with just my 2 free transfers. I can get away with a minus 10. Maybe the wild card is not as necessary as I have been originally thinking, because Ocon is okay. Piastri could still rise back up to 0.3, but if Antonelli is pretty much locked into a 0.6 rise, I can use that again. I could catch that up, if you know what I mean. Like, because Antonelli's gone up 0.6. If Oscar's gone down 0.3 and then he goes up 0.3, that brings me back, but Antonelli will get me back up there as well. That is the loosey-goosey math portion of F1 Fantasy Pole Position. That is a guarantee, but yeah, it's not all that bad right now in the F1 Fantasy Pole Position world. I guess it's not as doom and gloom as I have been thinking for about the last 24 hours, but that will do it for today's ultimate chip strategy guide. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if you want updates to it. If you have any specific questions, hit me up in the comments below. I haven't said this episode yet, but if you want 50% off your first month of F1 Fantasy Tools, which is a fantastic website, fantastic resource, use code EWIN50 to get your first month off. However, don't tell anyone. If you activate it on the 21st of March, the Friday of the Chinese Grand Prix, you'll get the next 4 races for 1 month. But don't tell them I told you that, okay? Just keep that between us. So yeah, promo code EWIN50 will get you 1 month or 50% off your first month of the F1 Fantasy Tools premium product. And also, if you could like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, that would be greatly appreciated. But yes, that has been the chip strategy episode. shorter than I thought it would be. I'm looking at the timer right now, so not too bad at all. But yeah, like I said, hit me up with some lineups in the comments below, and we can address those for the Chinese Grand Prix team selection in a couple of days. And we'll also have the deadline live stream, potentially a Friday night stream as well. We'll see how it's going. See if we get any surprises in the free practice session and the sprint qualifying. But it's been an enjoyable first week of F1 Fantasy content. The Australian Grand Prix did not go my way, but like I said, I'm on the recovery drive of all recovery drives for 2025. So I hope you hop in the passenger's seat with me. But once again, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you next time.